One man lost $20 billion in roughly 2 days, and almost no one on Wall Street even saw him coming. He controlled over $100 billion in stock, yet he never legally owned a single share of it. His name had been quietly erased from the markets years before. Stay with this, because the trick he used is still legal today, and it can hide more risk than any number you will ever see. This is the story of Archegos and a man named Bill Hwang. To understand the fall, you must understand the disappearance. Bill Hwang once ran one of the great hedge funds in Asia. He had trained under the legendary investor Julian Robertson. Robertson taught a generation of traders called the Tiger Cubs. Hwang launched his own fund and ran billions for years. Then in 2012, he pleaded guilty to insider trading. He paid fines and was banned from managing public money. For most people, that would have been the end of the road, but Hwang did not vanish. He simply changed his shape. He turned his own remaining fortune into a family office. A family office manages only the wealth of one family. And here is the detail that matters more than any other. A family office answers to almost no public regulator. It files little. It reports little. It hides in plain sight. Hwang named his new vehicle Archegos Capital Management. The name means leader, or one who goes first, in Greek. He started with around $10 billion of his own money. That alone would make him a serious force on Wall Street. But $10 billion was not nearly enough for his ambition. He wanted to control far more than he actually held. So he reached for the most dangerous tool in finance. That tool is leverage, the art of borrowing to bet bigger. Leverage means a small stake controls a huge position. If you are right, your gains multiply many times over. If you are wrong, the same force destroys you instead. Hwang did not borrow in the ordinary visible way. A normal investor buys shares and his name goes on record. Anyone can then see how much of a company he owns. Hwang wanted the upside without ever appearing on that record. So he used a contract called a total return swap. Listen closely, because this is the heart of the whole story. In a swap, the bank buys the shares in its own name. The bank legally owns the stock and shows it on its books. Hwang then signs a deal to receive all the gains. If the stock rises, the bank pays Hwang the profit. If the stock falls, Hwang must pay the bank the loss. On paper, the bank owns it. In truth, Hwang owns the risk. His name appears in no filing on no public register at all. To the outside world, Bill Hwang simply did not exist. This is how a banned man controlled billions, invisibly. Now multiply that secrecy across many different banks at once. Hwang signed swaps with Credit Suisse and Nomura. He signed swaps with Morgan Stanley, Goldman, and more. Each bank saw only the slice of risk it carried itself. No single bank ever saw the entire enormous picture. This is the most important idea in the whole disaster. The banks did not even know his total exposure. Each one thought it was lending to a careful, modest client. None of them knew the same client was everywhere at once. With $10 billion of his own, he controlled $100 billion. That is roughly $10 of stock for each dollar he held. And he did not spread that money across hundreds of names. He poured it into a tiny handful of concentrated bets. Here is the second deadly sin layered on top of the first. Hidden leverage was the first. Concentration was the second. He bet enormous sums on a few media and tech stocks. His biggest single bet was a company called Viacom CBS. He held vast hidden positions in a few Chinese tech names. In some of these stocks, he was the largest holder alive, yet no public document ever carried his name beside them. For a while, this strategy worked almost magically well. The stocks he chose rose and his swaps multiplied the gains. In a few short years, his $10 billion became much more. At its peak, his hidden empire was worth over $30 billion. He had quietly become one of the richest traders on earth, and still the wider market had no idea he was there. This is where the danger feels most like a triumph. Concentration on the way up looks exactly like genius. Every winning bet whispered that he could not be wrong. But concentration is a sword that cuts in both directions. The very thing lifting him could just as easily bury him. Because when you own too much of one falling thing, you cannot quietly sell without crushing the price yourself. His positions were simply too large to exit gracefully. Remember that, because it is the trap that finally closed. In March of 2021, the ground began to shift beneath him. Viacom-CBS announced it would sell new shares to the public. Selling new shares can push an existing stock price down. The stock he had bet everything on began to slide. At first it was a small dip, the kind markets shrug off. But Hwang was leveraged 10 times over on that name. A small fall in the stock meant a giant loss for him, and every swap he held carried a hidden tripwire. That tripwire is called a margin call from the bank. A margin call demands fresh cash the instant losses grow. It is the moment leverage stops being your friend. The banks called and asked Hwang for billions in cash. He did not have the billions they were now demanding. His money was already buried inside the falling positions. Here is the chain reaction that turns a loss into ruin. When a client cannot pay, the bank seizes the shares. Remember, the banks legally owned the stock all along, so they began dumping his enormous positions onto the market. Selling that much stock at once crushes the price further. The lower price triggered even more margin calls instantly. More calls forced more selling, which forced the price lower. It became a spiral that fed on itself faster each hour. The banks were now racing each other to sell first. Whoever sold last would be left holding the deepest losses. Some banks, sensing danger, quietly sold before the others. Goldman and Morgan Stanley moved early and escaped the worst. But Credit Suisse and Nomura were slower to react. They were left holding billions in collapsing positions. In just 2 trading days, the entire empire evaporated. Over $20 billion of Hwang's wealth simply vanished. It is one of the fastest fortunes ever lost in history. The banks themselves absorbed around $10 billion in losses. Credit Suisse alone lost over $5 billion. It was a wound that helped lead to that bank's own end. Nomura took a brutal multi-billion-dollar hit as well, and the wider public still barely understood what happened. A man no regulator tracked had blown a crater in Wall Street. Now let us pull the durable lessons from the wreckage. These are the rules that protect every dollar you invest. The first lesson is the quiet danger of hidden leverage. Leverage does not remove your risk, it only disguises it. The exposure is always there, waiting for one bad week. If you cannot see the leverage, assume it is larger than you think. The second lesson is the brutal math of concentration. Owning too much of one thing is owning a single point of failure. Diversification feels boring precisely because it is safe. It is the one free protection the market ever offers you. The third lesson may be the most important of them all. Position size is the difference between a loss and ruin. A wrong bet you survive teaches you, a wrong bet that ends you cannot. Never let one position be large enough to destroy you. Hwang violated all 3 rules at the very same moment. Hidden leverage, extreme concentration, and reckless sizing. Each alone is dangerous. Together they are simply fatal. And notice the strangest, most chilling part of this whole story. The institutions lending him billions could not measure his risk. If the giant banks could be blind to leverage like that, then you must be twice as careful with your own. The market does not announce hidden risk before it strikes. It simply waits for the 1 week you cannot afford. Bill Hwang was eventually convicted of fraud for all of this. But the deeper warning is not really about him at all. It is about the tools that let any risk hide from view. Real wealth is not built by controlling the most you can. It is built by surviving long enough to compound slowly. Use leverage you can see, hold size you can survive. Spread your bets so no single storm can ever end you. That is the whole lesson of the man no bank could see. He controlled $100 billion and it saved him from nothing. Protect the downside and the upside protects itself. If this was useful, the next episode covers margin of safety.